My name is Willow, and I'm 32. 3 years ago, I thought I'd found my forever in a man who promised me the world. That night, as I zipped up my suitcase, heart pounding, I knew I had to leave. Marcus's footsteps echoed closer, each one heavier than the last, his shadow stretching across the hardwood floor. I could feel his anger before he spoke, a storm brewing in the silence. Was I brave enough to walk away from the life I'd built? Have you ever stood at a crossroads, heart racing, knowing one choice could unravel everything? The question hung in my chest, sharp and real. If this resonates, hit like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. I'd love to know your story. I can still see the glow of that summer evening 3 years ago when Marcus slipped a ring on my finger. I was 29, a graphic designer with a sketchbook bursting with dreams, standing in a backyard strung with fairy lights. His smile felt like home, his promises of a shared future wrapping around me like a warm blanket. My mother Diane watched from the crowd, her eyes misty but proud. She'd raised me alone, teaching me to bend but not break, to keep the peace even when it cost me. Her hands, calloused from years of waitressing, clapped softly as we danced. I thought Marcus was my safe place, the one who'd never make me feel small. But that first year, cracks started showing, subtle at first, like hairline fractures in glass. We'd be curled up on the couch talking about my latest project, and he'd chuckle saying, "Willow, your designs are sweet, but they're not exactly going to pay for that beach house we want." His words stung like paper cuts, sharp but fleeting. I'd laugh it off, telling myself he was just tired from work, that he didn't mean it. He was a real estate agent, always on calls, his voice loud with clients chasing the next deal. I figured stress made him sharp, that it was temporary, like a storm that would pass. Then came the dinner party at our friend Tara's place 6 months after the wedding. The table was crowded with wine glasses, candlelight flickering, everyone swapping stories. I was telling them about our honeymoon in Maine, how we'd gotten lost on a hiking trail and stumbled into a tiny lobster shack, laughing over greasy fries and warm beer. Marcus cut me off mid-sentence. "That's not how it happened," he said, his voice loud enough to hush the room. "You always mix up the details, Willow. It was a clam shack, and we weren't lost. You just didn't listen to me." He grinned, but his eyes were cold like ice under sunlight. Everyone laughed, moving on, but my cheeks burned, my throat tight. I sipped my wine, forcing a smile, my hands trembling under the table. Later, as we cleared plates, Sadie pulled me into the kitchen, her brown eyes searching mine. "You okay?" "He didn't need to do that," she said, her voice low, her hand brushing my arm. I shrugged, stacking dishes in the sink, the clink of porcelain loud in my ears. "He's just particular about stories," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted. "It's not a big deal." But it was. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, the moonlight slicing through the blinds, replaying his words. Was I really remembering it wrong? Why did I feel so small, like I was shrinking into the mattress? My mother's voice echoed her stories of swallowing pain to keep things calm. I didn't want to be her, but I didn't know how to be different, how to push back without breaking everything apart. The next morning, I found my old college sketchbook tucked in a closet, its pages filled with bold, colorful designs I'd poured my heart into. I traced the lines, remembering the girl who wasn't afraid to take risks, who'd stay up late blending colors until they sang. Marcus had never liked those sketches, calling them too loud for clients, too chaotic. I'd stopped drawing like that, sticking to safe, neutral work. He approved of my creativity, tamed to fit his vision. Holding that book, my chest ached, like I'd lost a piece of myself without noticing. I slipped it back into the closet, telling myself I was overreacting, but the weight lingered heavy as the silence at breakfast, Marcus scrolling his phone, not looking at me. That summer, the air in our house grew heavier, like a room sealed shut. Marcus started checking my phone, his fingers scrolling through my texts, while I cooked dinner, the sizzle of onions masking my unease. "Who's this Lucas guy?" he'd ask, voice sharp, when my coworker sent a quick message about a project deadline. I'd explain it was just work, my heart racing, but he'd squint like he didn't believe me. "You don't need to be texting guys," he'd say, setting my phone down with a thud that echoed in my bones. I'd nod, stirring the pasta, my throat tight, telling myself he was just protective, that he cared too much. but the knot in my stomach said otherwise. One weekend, I planned a trip with Sadie to a cabin upstate just a few days to clear my head. I'd saved up from a small freelance gig, my excitement bubbling as I pictured us hiking, laughing by a fire. I showed Marcus the itinerary, hoping he'd be okay with it. He glanced at the paper, then tossed it on the counter, his eyes hard. "We can't afford this, Willow. You know that." His tone was final, like I was a child asking for too much. I pointed out we'd just paid off his car, my voice trembling but firm. He cut me off. "That's different. I need that car for work. This trip, it's frivolous." 2 days later, I came home to a massive new TV mounted on the living room wall, its box still in the hallway, the price tag crumpled inside. My stomach twisted, a hot flush of anger rising, but I didn't say anything, just carried the groceries inside my hands, shaking. My mother came over that fall, her graying hair pulled back, her eyes scanning our house like she could see the cracks I was hiding. Over coffee, she told me about the day she left my father, how she'd packed one bag and walked out while he was at work, her hands trembling but her steps sure. "I stayed too long, Willow," she said, her voice steady but sad, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Don't make my mistakes." I wanted to tell her about Marcus, about the way he made me feel like I was shrinking, but the words stuck heavy as stones. "We're fine, Mom," I lied, refilling her mug, the coffee steam curling between us. She didn't push, but her quiet look said she knew better, her eyes lingering on mine too long. At work, Lucas noticed I wasn't myself. He'd seen my latest design, a logo for a local bakery, and grinned his enthusiasm, catching me off guard. "This is incredible, Willow. You've got serious talent." His words felt like sunlight, warm and fleeting, but I brushed them off, glancing over my shoulder. If Marcus heard someone praising me, he'd twist it into something ugly, a reason to question me. "It's just a logo," I mumbled, but inside a flicker of pride sparked, quickly snuffed out by fear. That night, I tucked $50 from that freelance job into a shoebox under the bed, my hands shaking as I hid it behind old boots. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a secret I kept from Marcus, a tiny rebellion that made my heart race. By winter, I was second-guessing everything. Was I too sensitive? Was I making it worse by not speaking up? I'd sit at my desk, staring at blank canvases, my creativity frozen. Marcus's voice echoed, calling my work cute or pointless, his words like weights pinning me down. I'd always been the one to smooth things over, to avoid fights, just like my mother taught me. But as I lay awake listening to Marcus snore beside me, the room dark except for a sliver of moonlight, I felt something shift. That shoebox wasn't just money. It was a whisper of something I'd forgotten I could choose myself. I wasn't ready to act, but the thought burned quiet and steady, like a coal waiting to catch fire, warming me through the cold. The air in our house turned thick, like I was breathing through a straw. Marcus's control tightened, a slow squeeze I couldn't ignore. By spring, he started pushing me to quit freelancing altogether. "You don't need that side hustle," he said one night, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, his voice calm but cutting. "Focus on keeping this place together. I'm the one bringing in the real money." His words hit like a slap, sharp and stinging, but I just nodded, my sketchbook gathering dust on the shelf. I'd always loved designing, pouring my heart into colors and shapes, each piece a story, I told myself. Now every stroke felt like a fight. I was losing my hands, hesitant, my ideas fading. I told myself I'd talk to him later when he was in a better mood, but that moment never came, the silence between us growing heavier each day. One evening, I came home late from the office, my arms full of grocery bags, my shoulders aching. I'd forgotten to pick up Marcus's favorite coffee, the dark roast. He insisted on its absence, a small oversight I knew he'd notice. He was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone, his face lit by the screen's glow. "Where's my coffee?" he asked, his voice flat but sharp at the edges, like a blade hidden in cloth. I froze, my hands still on the counter, the bags rustling softly. "I forgot," I said quietly, bracing for what came next. He stood, slamming his phone down, the sound cracking through the room. "You forgot, Willow? You're useless sometimes." His words cut deeper than they should have, slicing through the thin armor I'd built. I mumbled an apology, turning to unpack the groceries, my eyes stinging, but he just walked out, leaving me alone with the hum of the fridge and the weight of his disdain. That night I couldn't sleep. His words looped in my head, useless, 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 each one a stone piling on my chest. I thought of my mother, how she'd spent years tiptoeing around my father's temper, her life a careful dance to avoid his anger. Was this my life now? I wanted to scream, to throw something, but instead I lay there, my anger curling into a tight knot trapped inside me. I kept thinking about that shoebox under the bed, the $50 I'd hidden, its presence a secret I clung to. It wasn't enough to change anything, but it was proof I could keep something for myself, something Marcus couldn't touch, a spark in the dark. A few weeks later, Sadie texted inviting me to a book club. She'd joined a group of women meeting over wine and novels. She'd been distant since I'd canceled our cabin trip, and I missed her laugh, her way of making everything feel lighter, like the world wasn't so heavy. I showed Marcus the invite, hoping he'd be okay with it, my fingers trembling as I held out my phone. He snorted, tossing his keys on the table with a clatter. Book club. You're not cut out for that, Willow. Those women are smarter than you, and you'll just embarrass yourself. My face burned, his words sinking in like acid. I didn't argue. Just texted Sadie back saying I was busy, my fingers shaking as I typed. She didn't reply, and the silence stung like I was losing her too, another piece of my world slipping away. The next day I was in the living room folding laundry, the repetitive motion grounding me. I overheard Marcus on the phone in the next room, his voice low, smug, a tone I hadn't heard before. "Oh, Willow." "I keep her in line," he said, chuckling, the sound cold and sharp. "She's not going anywhere." My blood ran cold, my hands pausing on a half-folded shirt, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. He was laughing about me, about controlling me like I was a game he'd already won. I wanted to storm in, to yell, to demand he stop, but my feet wouldn't move, rooted by fear and fury. Instead, I slipped the shirt into the basket, my hands trembling, and went to the bedroom. I closed the door softly, my anger burning hotter than ever, a fire trapped inside me waiting for a way out. I started fading into the corners of my own life. Marcus's grip tightened, not with fists, but with words that carved away at me, each one sharper than the last. He didn't just want me home. He wanted me silent, invisible, a shadow of the woman I'd been. He began questioning every friendship, every call. "Why do you need to talk to Sadie so much?" He'd ask, his eyes narrowing as I held my phone, his voice low but laced with suspicion. "She's trouble, Willow. You're better off without her." I stopped inviting her over, stopped answering her texts. Each ignored message a cut to my heart. Sadie's messages grew shorter, then stopped altogether, her silence louder than words. I'd see her name light up my screen and feel a stab of loneliness, but I told myself it was easier this way, safer, less likely to spark Marcus's anger. Then came the money. I found a bank statement tucked in Marcus's desk, hidden under a stack of old receipts showing thousands in a savings account I didn't know existed. We'd been scraping by, or so he said, eating cheap meals, skipping date nights, while he vetoed every small expense I suggested, like a new lamp or a weekend away. Yet there it was, his secret stash growing while he told me we couldn't afford anything. I confronted him that night, my voice shaking but steady, the paper trembling in my hand. "What's this account, Marcus? You said we were broke." He leaned back in his chair, smirking, his eyes glinting with control. "You're terrible with money, Willow. I'm just protecting us. You wouldn't understand." His tone was so calm, so condescending, it made my skin crawl like I was a child he was scolding. I opened my mouth to argue, but he waved me off, his hand slicing through the air. "Drop it. You're making a scene." I stood there, fists clenched, feeling like I was screaming into a void, my voice swallowed by his dismissal. My sister Harper called a few days later, her voice soft, worried, cutting through the fog I'd been living in. "You don't sound like yourself, Willow. What's going on?" I wanted to tell her everything about the account, the way Marcus made me feel like a shadow, my edges blurring with every passing day. But shame choked me, a heavy weight in my throat. I snapped instead. I'm fine, Harper. Stop prying. My words were sharp, and I heard her pause, the hurt clear in her silence. I'm just worried, she said quietly before hanging up. I sat on the couch staring at the wall, tears streaming down my face, hot and unstoppable. I'd pushed away the one person who'd always had my back, and I hated myself for it, the guilt mixing with my anger until I couldn't tell them apart. One afternoon, I was cleaning out a drawer when I found an old photo of myself taken at an art gallery when I was 25. I was standing in front of my first exhibited piece, a vibrant abstract that had taken weeks to perfect. My smile, wide, my eyes bright with possibility. That girl felt like a stranger, someone I'd lost touch with. I tucked the photo away, my chest tight with grief for who I'd been, for the dreams I'd let fade. Marcus came home early, catching me staring at the drawer, my hands still on the handle. "What's with the long face?" he asked, his voice edged with irritation, like my sadness was an inconvenience. I mumbled something about being tired, but he just rolled his eyes, muttering, "You're always so dramatic," before walking away. That night as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of that photo, the girl who'd believed in herself. My anger boiled, mixing with a deep, aching sorrow for the life I'd let slip away. I wasn't just losing my friends, my sister, my art. I was losing me. Every day Marcus chipped away a little more, and I let him, my silence a betrayal of myself. The shoebox under the bed felt heavier now, not just $50, but a lifeline I was too scared to grab. I curled into myself, the weight of his words, his lies pressing down until I could barely breathe, my heart a drumbeat of pain. Something had to break, but I didn't know if it would be him or me. The weight of that hidden bank statement burned in my mind for weeks, a fire I couldn't put out. It wasn't just the money, it was the lie, the way Marcus had built a wall between us with secrets while I scrambled to please him. I was done shrinking, done letting him define me. That morning I woke before dawn, the house still dark, my hands steady as I pulled my suitcase from the closet. I packed quietly, folding sweaters and jeans, each item a step toward freedom, my movements careful but sure. My heart pounded, but for the first time it wasn't just fear. It was resolve, a quiet fire I hadn't felt in years. I'd leave today, no more waiting for the right moment, no more excuses. I moved through the house like a ghost, grabbing my laptop, my sketchbook, the shoebox with my $50. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows across the living room, the light soft but cold. I zipped the suitcase, the sound sharp in the silence, a declaration I couldn't take back. That's when I heard the front door slam. Marcus was home early, his keys hitting the table with a clatter. His footsteps thumped closer, heavy and deliberate, each one tightening the knot in my chest. My stomach dropped, my breath catching. I hadn't planned for this, hadn't prepared for him to find me like this. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was low, a growl that made my skin prickle like a storm about to break. I turned, gripping the suitcase handle, my knuckles white, and saw him in the doorway, his face dark with fury, his shoulders squared. "Put that bag down, Willow. Divorce. Don't even dream about it." His words were like a blade cutting through the air, sharp and final. I opened my mouth to speak, but my voice caught trapped in my throat. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine, and I saw something new in them, something raw and unfiltered, a rage he'd been holding back for years. He raised his fist, the motion slow but deliberate, aimed at my stomach, his knuckles taut. Time froze. My legs trembled, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All those years of swallowing my anger, of making myself small, crashed over me like a wave. Was this who I'd become? Someone who stood still while a fist came down. My mind screamed to run, to fight, but my body wouldn't listen, paralyzed by fear. I clutched the locket my mother gave me, its cool metal grounding me, a tether to the girl I used to be, the one who dreamed bigger than this moment. The neighbor's dog barked outside, sharp and sudden, breaking the silence. Marcus paused, his fist still raised, his eyes flickering toward the window, a crack in his control. I heard a knock at the door, quick and insistent. "Willow, you okay in there?" It was Nora, our neighbor, her voice muffled but firm, cutting through the haze. Marcus lowered his hand slightly, his jaw tight, his breath uneven. "Everything's fine." He called, his tone clipped, but he didn't move. I stood there, my heart hammering, the suitcase heavy in my grip. Nora knocked again, louder, her voice sharper. I heard yelling, "I'm not leaving." My chest tightened, a mix of relief and dread washing over me. Someone was here, but would it be enough? The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, my breath shallow as I waited, caught in the space between fear and hope. Nora's knocking stopped, her footsteps fading as Marcus glared at me, his fists still hovering, his eyes burning with a fury I'd never seen so raw. The room felt too small, the air too thick, like I was trapped in a shrinking box. Then a shadow moved behind him, and my sister Harper stepped out of the bathroom, her face pale but fierce, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Put your hand down, Marcus," she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife through cloth. I gasped, my knees nearly buckling, my breath catching in my throat. I hadn't known she was here. She'd come by earlier, worried after our last call, slipping in quietly to check on me, her presence a secret I hadn't expected. Marcus froze, his eyes darting between us, a flicker of panic breaking through his anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice cracking, betraying his unease. Harper didn't flinch, her stance solid, her eyes locked on his. I recorded everything she said, holding up her phone, its screen glowing faintly. "Your threats, your yelling, all of it." My heart stopped, the words sinking in like stones. Recorded, the truth of my life laid bare in a way I couldn't hide from. I wanted to feel relief, but shame flooded me instead, hot and heavy. My sister had seen me like this, cowering, broken, my weakness exposed in the harsh light of her courage. I gripped the suitcase handle tighter, my knuckles aching, my breath shallow. Marcus's face twisted, a mix of rage and disbelief, his lips curling. "You're bluffing," he spat, stepping toward Harper, his shoulders squared, his voice sharp but unsteady. She stood her ground, her eyes never leaving his, her phone still raised like a shield. "Try me," she said, her voice like steel, unwavering. I couldn't breathe, my mind spinning, the room tilting around me. All those years of hiding his cruelty, of pretending it wasn't real, and now it was captured, undeniable, a truth I couldn't escape. But instead of strength, I felt exposed, like my weakness was on display for the world to see, my failure laid bare. Harper's gaze flicked to me, softening for a moment, her voice quieter. "Willow, you don't have to do this alone," she said, her words a lifeline I wasn't sure I could grab. Marcus laughed, a cold, bitter sound that echoed in the small room. "You're pathetic, both of you. Willow, you think you can just walk away? You're nothing without me." His words hit like a punch, each one tearing open wounds I'd tried to ignore, ripping through the fragile hope I'd been clinging to. I wanted to scream back, to tell him he was wrong, that I was more than his shadow. But my throat was dry, my voice gone, swallowed by years of silence. Harper took a step forward, her phone still raised, her voice cutting through the air. "Say one more word, Marcus, and this goes to the police." He hesitated, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't back down, his presence a weight that pressed against us both. The room pulsed with silence, every second, stretching into eternity, the air thick with tension. I stood there, caught between them, my suitcase heavy in my hand, my heart heavier, thudding in my chest. Harper's presence was a lifeline, a beacon in the dark, but it also burned, a reminder of how far I'd fallen. She'd seen the truth I'd buried, the life I'd let myself endure, and the shame of it choked me. I wanted to run, to disappear, to erase this moment, but my feet were rooted to the floor, my body frozen. Marcus's stare bore into me, daring me to move, to choose, his eyes glinting with a challenge I wasn't sure I could meet. My chest ached, my strength crumbling under the weight of his words, her courage, my failure. I was breaking, and there was no way out, no door to open, just this moment, raw and unyielding. Harper's words hung in the air, her phone a shield between us and Marcus's rage. My hand trembled on the suitcase, but her steady gaze gave me something to hold on to, a thread of courage I hadn't felt in years. I took a shaky breath, my voice barely a whisper, raw from fear. "I'm leaving, Marcus." His eyes widened, a flash of shock breaking through his anger. But before he could speak, Harper grabbed my arm, her grip firm but gentle. "Come on," she said, pulling me toward the door, her steps sure. My legs moved stiff at first, then faster as we slipped past him, his shadow looming but not stopping us. We stepped into the cool night air, the door slamming shut behind us, the sound sharp and final like a lock clicking into place. We drove to Harper's apartment in silence, my suitcase in the back seat, my heart still pounding a drumbeat in my chest. Inside, she poured me a glass of water, her hands steady, but her eyes searching mine full of quiet worry. "You're safe now," she said softly, setting the glass down. I nodded, but I didn't feel safe, not yet. My mind was a tangle of fear and relief, Marcus's words echoing, "You're nothing without me." I wanted to believe he was wrong, but doubt clung to me like damp clothes, heavy and cold. I sat on her couch, the glass untouched, my hands clasped tight, trying to anchor myself in this new, unsteady world. The next morning, I stared at my phone, Marcus's 2 missed calls glowing on the screen, voicemails I couldn't bring myself to hear. Harper sat beside me, her voice gentle but firm, like a hand pulling me up. "You need to do this, Willow. For you." I nodded, my fingers hovering over the screen, my breath uneven. I searched for a lawyer, landing on Tessa, a woman with kind eyes in her online photo, her bio promising compassion and strength. I called her, my voice cracking as I explained I needed help, that I was leaving my husband, the words spilling out like a confession. Tessa listened, her tone calm but direct, her voice a steady line through my chaos. "We'll start with a divorce filing and a restraining order," she said. "You're stronger than you know." Her words hit me, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, like a spark catching in dry grass. I spent the afternoon filling out forms with Tessa over the phone, each answer a small act of defiance, a brick in a wall I was building. My hands shook as I signed my name, the pen slipping slightly, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a signature that was mine alone. Harper watched from the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, giving me space, but never leaving her presence a quiet strength. I thought of my mother, how she'd walked away from my father with nothing but a bag, and her courage, her hands steady despite the fear. I wasn't there yet, but I was moving, each step a choice to keep going. That evening, I pulled out my old sketchbook, the one I'd hidden from Marcus, its pages worn but alive with color. My fingers traced the bold lines I'd once drawn with confidence, the curves of a life I'd almost forgotten. I grabbed a pencil and started sketching, just a simple curve, a splash of color, nothing grand but mine. The act felt like breathing again, like I was pulling myself back from the edge, my hands steady for the first time in months. I looked at Harper, who was scrolling through her phone, her face soft in the lamplight, and felt a surge of gratitude, warm and grounding. I wasn't alone. For the first time, I believed I could do this, that I could fight for myself, one small step at a time, one line at a time. The next day, I sat at Harper's kitchen table, my phone buzzing with another voicemail from Marcus, his name flashing like a warning. I deleted it without listening, my fingers steady on the screen, the act small but heavy, like cutting a chain that had bound me for years. I needed to rebuild, to find the Willow who'd been buried under his words, under the weight of his control. I called Sadie, my voice shaky but sure, the phone cold against my ear. "I'm sorry," I said as soon as she picked up. "I pushed you away and I was wrong." There was a pause, a breath held across the line, then her voice warm and familiar like a door opening. "I've been waiting for you to come back," she said. I exhaled, a knot in my chest, loosening, the sound of her forgiveness a balm I hadn't known I needed. Sadie came over that afternoon, her arms full of takeout and a rental lease she'd found online, her excitement spilling over as she spread the papers out. "This place is perfect for you," she said, pointing to a photo of a small studio downtown, affordable with a window that caught the morning light. I imagined my sketches on the walls, a bed I'd chosen, a space that was mine alone, and felt a spark of hope, fragile but real. We spent hours planning, Sadie's laughter filling the room as she teased me about my terrible taste in curtains, her jokes light but kind. For the first time in months, I laughed too, the sound foreign but real, bubbling up from a place I'd thought was lost. The mediation session with Marcus came a week later, a cold room with a long table and fluorescent lights. Tessa prepped me, her voice calm over the phone, steadying me. "Stay clear, Willow. He'll try to twist things." I nodded, though she couldn't see me, my stomach churning as I walked into the lawyer's office, my hands clammy. Marcus sat across the table, his jaw tight, his eyes cold like he was sizing me up. "You're making a mistake," he said before I could speak, his voice low and sharp. "You'll regret this." I took a breath, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice even stronger than I felt. "I want the house sold, and I want my share." He laughed, sharp and bitter, the sound grating against my nerves, but I didn't flinch. Tessa nodded beside me, her presence steadying me like an anchor in a storm. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping venomous. "You think you can just start over? You're nothing without me." His words stung sharp as ever, but they didn't sink in like before. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who needed to control me to feel big, his confidence a mask for something hollow. "I'm enough," I said the words, surprising me with their strength clear and steady. He blinked, caught off guard, his smirk faltering, and for a moment the room was silent, the air heavy with the weight of my resolve. Tessa scribbled notes, her pen scratching softly, and I felt my pulse steady, like I'd reclaimed a piece of ground I'd lost long ago. Back at Harper's, I sorted through a box of things I'd brought from the house, each item a relic of a life I was leaving behind. At the bottom was a scarf Marcus had given me early on soft blue, a gift from when he still smiled at me when his words were kind. I held it, my fingers tracing the fabric, its softness a lie against the truth I now knew. I walked to a donation bin down the street, the evening air cool against my skin, and dropped it in the lid, clanging shut, a sound that echoed in my chest. As I stood there, the sky bruising purple, I felt a quiet shift inside me. I wasn't free yet, but I was moving step by step towards something that was mine. I looked back at Harper's apartment, the light glowing in the window, warm and steady, and knew I was done letting Marcus define me. The mediation session left a quiet hum in my chest, like I'd flicked a switch I didn't know I had. But Marcus wasn't done, his fight as relentless as ever. He dragged out the divorce, contesting every detail, demanding the house, the car, even my old dining table, as if he could keep me tethered through objects. Tessa warned me he'd play dirty, her voice calm but firm over the phone, and she was right. A week later, I got a call from my boss, Karen, her voice tight, hesitant. "Willow, is there something going on? Someone's been emailing the team saying you're unreliable, that you're leaving projects unfinished." My stomach sank, a cold weight settling in. It was Marcus, his spite reaching into my work, my sanctuary. I could picture him typing those lies, his fingers steady, his face smug, determined to break what I'd built. I explained to Karen, my voice low, careful that it was personal, that I was handling it. She sighed, her tone softening, a hint of warmth breaking through. "You're one of our best, Willow. Don't let this mess with your head." I thanked her, my throat tight, but the shame lingered hot and heavy. He was reaching into my world, trying to unravel the threads I'd woven. At Harper's apartment, I sat on the floor, staring at my laptop, the emails from clients glowing on the screen, their words blurred by my racing thoughts. I wanted to work, to lose myself in designs, but my hands wouldn't move, frozen by the weight of his lies. Marcus's voice echoed not from the mediation, but from years of him telling me I wasn't enough. His words a shadow I couldn't shake. Then Lucas called, his voice bright but careful, like he was stepping lightly around my pain. "Hey, I saw those emails," Karen showed me. "It's nonsense, Willow. I told her you've been killing it on the bakery project." I swallowed hard, my throat tight, his kindness catching me off guard. "Thanks, Lucas," I said, barely above a whisper, my voice trembling. He paused, then added, "You don't deserve this. Keep going." His words were simple, but they landed like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. I opened a new canvas on my laptop, sketching a logo for a coffee shop, my lines sharper than they'd been in months, each stroke a quiet rebellion against Marcus's shadow. It wasn't much, but it was proof I could still create, still fight, still be me. Harper came home that evening, her face tense, her bag hitting the couch with a thud. She'd been on the phone with our cousin trying to keep family gossip at bay. Her voice strained as she spoke. Marcus called Aunt Linda, she said, her eyes meeting mine. He's telling everyone you're having a breakdown, that you're abandoning him. I froze my pencil, hovering over the sketch, my heart sinking. The idea of him twisting my story, painting me as the villain to our family, made my chest ache, a dull pain that spread like ink. I wanted to call Aunt Linda to explain, to set the truth straight, but Harper grabbed my hand, her grip firm. "Don't," she said, her voice steady but tired. "He wants you to react. Let's focus on you." Her words were a lifeline, but I saw the strain in her eyes, the weight of standing by me, and it cut deeper than I expected. I nodded, but inside I was unraveling the threads of my life, fraying. Marcus's lies were spreading, seeping into my work, my family, my sense of self, like a stain I couldn't wash out. I stood at Harper's window, staring at the street below, the lights blurring as my eyes stung the city moving on, while I felt stuck. I'd taken a stand, but the cost was piling up heavy and relentless, and I felt it pressing down, a weight I wasn't sure I could carry, a storm I wasn't sure I could weather. I woke up the next morning to a text from Karen confirming a new freelance contract for a local boutique, the pay good enough to cover rent for the studio Sadie had found. I stared at the message, my coffee cooling on the table, the mug's warmth fading in my hands. It should have felt like a win, a step forward, but Marcus's lies clung to me, heavy as fog, clouding the moment. I opened my laptop, forcing myself to work each line I drew, a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let him win. The boutique's owner loved my pitch, her email full of praise that made my chest ache with something like pride, but it was fragile, like a candle flickering in a draft, easily snuffed out. That afternoon, I joined a support group. Sadie had found a small circle of women in a community center, their voices soft but strong. I sat in a folding chair, my hands clasped tight, my nails digging into my palms, listening to their stories of leaving men who'd tried to break them. A woman named Lila spoke about hiding money in a sock drawer, her voice steady but her eyes distant, carrying a pain I recognized. I nodded, thinking of my shoebox, now up to $200 from small gigs, each dollar a secret I'd kept. Sharing my story felt like peeling off my skin, raw and exposing, but their quiet nods, their lack of judgment, stitched something back together inside me, a small repair to a frayed heart. When I got back to Harper's, my mother was there, sitting on the couch with a mug of tea, her face soft but strained, like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "I should have seen it sooner," she said, her voice breaking, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I let you down, Willow." I shook my head, sitting beside her, the couch creaking under our weight, but the guilt in her eyes mirrored mine, a shared wound we hadn't named. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault that I'd chosen to stay silent, but the words wouldn't come, stuck in my throat. Instead, I squeezed her hand, the silence between us loud with unspoken regrets, a bridge we were still building. Later, I checked my phone and saw a message from a mutual friend, Tara. "Marcus says you're throwing everything away," she wrote. "Is that true?" My throat tightened, my fingers hovering over the screen. Even Tara, who'd seen his sharp edges at that dinner party, was doubting me, her words a quiet betrayal. I didn't reply, just set the phone down, my hands cold, my heart heavy. The world I'd known was shifting, friends slipping away. Marcus's narrative spreading like ink and water, staining everything I'd built. I stood at Harper's window, staring at the street below, the lights blurring as my eyes stung the city's pulse, mocking my stillness. I'd taken a stand, but the cost was piling up, relentless, and I felt it pressing down, a weight I wasn't sure I could carry. The next day, Tessa called with news the court had approved my restraining order, and Marcus had to move out of the house. I should have felt lighter, like a chain had broken, but instead I felt hollow, the victory tasting bitter. I pictured him packing his hands, tossing my things aside, his voice still claiming me as nothing, his shadow lingering. I sat on Harper's couch, my sketchbook open but untouched, its pages blank, the pencil heavy in my hand. The fight wasn't over, and I was tired. My strength fraying at the edges like a rope stretched too thin, ready to snap under the weight of it all. I moved into the studio apartment a week after the restraining order was granted. It was small, just a single room with a slanted ceiling and a window that let in soft morning light painting the walls gold. I stood in the empty space, my suitcase at my feet, my shoes still dusty from the move, and felt a quiet settle over me, fragile but real. For the first time, this was mine, a space no one could shape but me. I hung a canvas on the wall, a sketch I'd done of a winding river, its lines bold and free-drawn late one night when I couldn't sleep. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, a piece of me I'd reclaimed, and that was enough. That evening, Sadie came over carrying a bag of takeout and a potted basil plant, its leaves bright against the plain pot. "For your new start," she said, setting it on the windowsill, her smile warm. We sat on the floor eating noodles straight from the cartons, the city humming outside a low, steady pulse. She told me about her new job, her voice bright, her stories full of small joys. I found myself laughing at her jokes, the sound easy in my throat, a melody I'd forgotten I could sing. "You seem different," she said, her eyes soft, studying me. "Lighter." I nodded, poking at my food, the noodles slipping between my chopsticks. I wasn't whole yet, but I could feel the pieces shifting, finding new places to fit like a puzzle coming together slowly. The next morning I woke early and walked to a nearby cafe, the air crisp with fall leaves crunching under my boots. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window watching people pass by, their lives, unfolding in small, ordinary ways, a man carrying a briefcase, a woman pushing a stroller. I pulled out my notebook and started writing not designs, but thoughts, fragments of who I was becoming. I wrote about the years I'd spent dimming myself, about the fear that still lingered but didn't own me anymore, its grip loosening with each word. The pen moved fast, my hands steady, and I realized I was mapping a path forward, one word at a time, one truth at a time. Back at the apartment, I unpacked a box of books, stacking them on a shelf I'd bought secondhand, its wood scratched but sturdy. One caught my eye, a poetry collection I'd loved in college, its spine creased from years of reading. I flipped it open, the pages worn, and a line stood out. "You are not what you've lost." I read it again, my breath catching the words, sinking deep. I'd lost so much time, confidence, pieces of myself, but I was still here, building something new, brick by brick. I set the book down, my fingers lingering on the cover, and felt a stillness I hadn't known in years, a quiet that wasn't empty but full. I stood at the window, the basil plant catching the light, its leaves small but stubborn, reaching for the sun. I watered it, the soil cool under my fingertips, and thought about how it would grow if I cared for it, how it didn't need much, just time and patience. Like me, it was finding its way, rooting itself in new ground. I wasn't running anymore, not from Marcus or from myself. The quiet of the apartment wrapped around me. Not heavy but soft, like a promise I was finally ready to keep, a vow to myself I wouldn't break. The days began to blur softly, each one a step into a life I was shaping alone, my hands steadier with each choice. I took on a new freelance project, a branding job for a small bookstore, its shelves packed with novels and worn paperbacks. The owner, a woman named June, met me at her shop, her eyes bright as she talked about her dream of creating a community space, a place for stories to live. I sketched as she spoke, my ideas flowing easily, my pencil moving with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. When I showed her the first draft, her eyes lit up, her smile wide. "This is exactly it, Willow," she said, her voice warm. I smiled, a warmth spreading through me, not loud but steady, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm, a pulse I could trust. Lucas stopped by the apartment one evening, carrying a stack of design magazines. He thought I'd like their glossy covers catching the light. We sat on my tiny balcony, the city lights flickering below, the air cool against our skin. He didn't push, didn't ask about Marcus, just talked about work and music, his voice easy, his stories simple but grounding. "You're doing good," he said as he left, his words simple but heavy with belief, like a gift I hadn't expected. I stood at the door after he was gone, my hand on the knob, feeling the weight of his trust in me, a quiet kind of friendship that reminded me I could be seen without being judged, that I could exist without proving myself. The next day, I drove to my mother's house, a small place an hour away with a garden she tended like a ritual, its flowers bright against the green. We sat on her porch, the air thick with the smell of jasmine, the sun warm on our faces. She looked at me, her hands wrapped around a mug, her eyes soft but searching. "I'm proud of you, Willow. I wish I'd been braver for you," she said, her voice cracking slightly. I shook my head, reaching for her hand, her skin warm and familiar. "You taught me how to start over." I said, my voice soft but sure, the words a bridge between us. We sat in silence, the kind that didn't need filling, and I felt the past settle, not gone but quieter, like a book I'd finally closed, its pages worn, but no longer heavy. That night I wrote a letter to the girl I'd been at 22, the one who dreamed big and loved without fear, her heart open to the world. I didn't apologize or dwell on what I'd lost. Instead, I told her she was still here, in the way I laughed with Sadie, in the lines I drew, in the way I watered that basil plant every morning, its leaves reaching for light. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer, not to hide it, but to keep it safe, a reminder of who I was becoming. It wasn't a promise of perfection, just a nod to the woman I was building, one choice at a time. I stood in my apartment, the walls now dotted with sketches, the air carrying the faint scent of basil, a green note in the quiet. The world outside was loud, but in here it was still a space I'd carved out for myself. I looked out the window, the city glowing softly, and felt my breath slow, steady, like a river finding its course. I wasn't fixed, wasn't whole, but I was enough. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full of me, steady and growing, ready for whatever came next. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, a slim envelope slipped under my apartment door, its edges worn from the journey. I sat on the floor, the pages spread out before me, my name inked in black, Willow Free. I didn't cry or cheer, just traced the letters with my finger, feeling their weight, the finality of them. The fight was over, not with a bang, but a quiet close, like a door shutting softly. I stacked the papers, neatly placed them in a drawer, and walked to my window, the city waking up below its rhythm, steady, unaware of the life I'd just reclaimed. I started new routines, small anchors in the days, grounding me in this new world. Mornings I'd brew coffee, the aroma filling my small apartment, and sit at my desk sketching logos for clients who didn't know my past, who saw only the work I created. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Each design a thread stitching me back together, each line a step toward myself. I'd walk to the park nearby, watching kids chase pigeons, their laughter sharp and bright, their joy, a reminder of a lightness I was learning to carry again, one step at a time, one moment at a time. Sadie and Harper came over one evening, bringing pizza and a bottle of wine, their laughter spilling into the room. We sat on my couch now, draped with a thrift store blanket, its colors soft and worn. We talked about nothing important, movies, recipes, the stray cat that kept visiting my balcony, its eyes curious and unafraid. Their voices filled the room, warm and steady, a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed. My mother joined us later, her smile soft as she squeezed my hand, her touch grounding me. "You're home," she said, and I knew she didn't mean the apartment, but the woman I was becoming, the one I'd fought to find. I started a journal, not for designs, but for thoughts I'd never said aloud, words I'd kept locked away. I wrote about the mornings I woke without dread, about the way the light hit my basil plant, now thriving with new leaves, its green vibrant against the sill. I wrote about fear, how it still crept in sometimes, whispering that I'd fail alone, that I wasn't enough. But I'd look at my sketches, my tiny apartment, my life, and know I was already proving it wrong, my strength quiet but stubborn. Standing in my kitchen, I chopped vegetables for a soup, the knife steady in my hand, the rhythm soothing. The act was simple, mundane, but it felt like a gift, a meal I'd made for myself in a space I'd chosen my own. I stirred the pot, the steam rising warm and fragrant, and felt my shoulders loosen, my breath slow. The past was behind me, not gone, but distant, like a storm that had passed, leaving clear skies. I was here, breathing, building, and that was enough for now, a foundation I could stand on. One afternoon, I finished a design for June's bookstore, A logo with clean lines and a small open book at its heart, simple but alive. I sent it off my fingers, hovering over the keyboard a moment of doubt before hitting send. When June replied, calling it perfect, her words glowing with excitement, I leaned back in my chair, a quiet pride settling in, warm and steady. It wasn't just about the work. It was about trusting my own hands again, my own voice, believing they could carry me forward. I walked to my balcony, the stray cat curled up in a patch of sun, its fur soft against the concrete. I set out a small bowl of water for it, smiling as it blinked at me, unafraid. Its trust a small gift I hadn't expected. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to be small to fit into someone else's idea of me, my edges smoothed to please him. Those days felt far away now, like a house I'd left behind, its rooms empty. I wasn't fearless, not even close. Some nights I still woke with my heart racing, expecting Marcus's voice in the dark, his shadow lingering in my dreams. But I'd turn on the lamp, see my sketches on the wall, their colors bold, and remember I was here, not there. I was learning to carry my own weight, to forgive myself for staying too long, for not seeing sooner what I deserved, my heart softer toward the girl I'd been. I started a blog, nothing fancy, just a place to share my story, my words plain but true. I wrote about the slow work of rebuilding, the way small choices like planting basil or sketching a line could feel like rebellion, like claiming ground. Messages came in from strangers, women who'd walked paths like mine, their words raw and real, their stories echoing my own. Reading them, I felt less alone, like my pain had woven me into something bigger, a tapestry of resilience. I wasn't fixed, but I was growing, my roots spreading, and that was enough. The lesson I carried wasn't loud or grand, not a shout, but a whisper. It was simple. You don't need permission to save yourself. Your strength doesn't have to roar. It can be quiet, stubborn, like a seed pushing through soil, breaking through despite the weight. I learned to trust the small moments, the ones that reminded me I was whole, even when I felt cracked, even when the scars ached. I'd been afraid of being alone, but now I saw it differently. Alone wasn't empty. It was space to become, to grow into the woman I was always meant to be. What moment made you realize you could start over? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story, to know what brought you here. If this resonated, please subscribe, and maybe share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's finding their way. Thank you for listening, for being here with me. Keep building your own light, one step at a time, one breath at a time.